Hi all, my name is Isabella Lehman. I am currently an undergraduate student studying psychology here at Penn State, and I have the honor today of interviewing Rachel and learning a little bit more about her career path and her research.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a fourth-year anthropology Ph.D. candidate at Penn State.
Rachel, I'm so excited to interview you today. Can you start off by telling us how you got interested in science and maybe kind of what inspired you to go into anthropology?
Yeah, so I first got interested in doing science, I think, when I was a freshman in undergrad. I took an intro to biological anthropology class with Josh Linder at James Madison University in Virginia. I was an English major and I had, been wanting to, I think, work on environmental issues, but I didn't think that it was possible to do that within anthropology until he started telling me about his primate conservation research in West Africa, and then he started mentoring me and getting me involved in some of his work, and that was really great. And then I ended up transitioning to working in Tanzania in East Africa with Jennifer Kaufman. She's a cultural anthropologist, and she mentored me kind of throughout my undergraduate and graduate career, and I worked for her field school program first as a student and then as a kind of like TA and instructor. So I've spent a bunch of summers in East Africa, and then after graduating from undergrad, I did a Fulbright study research grant where I continued working in Tanzania for the full year. And then sort of through that process, I learned a lot. I worked with a lot of wonderful people who taught me so many things, and I ended up from there doing my master's in applied biological anthropology at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And then while I was there, I was kind of thinking a lot about how so many of the different evolutionary questions and environmental issues that I had come across in these different places were also happening back home in the Appalachian region. And so I started researching kind of like ecology and biology programs in the region, and then that's when I learned about Penn State's integrated anthropology program. And I got put in touch with Eric Burkhart, who's now my mentor, and he started teaching me about how all these medicinal plants really kind of intersect with people's livelihoods and environmental issues in the region. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the work that I'm doing now.
Wow, that is really exciting. You have quite the experiences. So definitely, as I was reading through your papers, some things that interested me were your general interest in plants. Do you have something that maybe catalyzed that interest or kind of took that off? Was there some sort of inspiration when you were abroad or something like that?
Yeah, so I had learned a lot about the interconnections between native plant and animal species, and I originally wanted to study seed dispersal and how relationships between native mammals in the area can influence plants, and how that in turn can influence people's livelihoods in a bunch of different ways, like what kinds of plant species are around and how people utilize those plants. And then I ended up kind of changing directions a little bit once I started working with Eric, because I just realized through working with him that a lot of people are really interested in medicinal plants specifically. People in this area have been using plants as medicines for hundreds and thousands of years even. I don't know about thousands of years here, but the main species that I study is American ginseng, and people in a lot of cultures in East Asia have utilized ginseng for thousands of years to treat a wide range of conditions. And that's something that people here in the region today also do as well. So I kind of shifted gears a little bit, and then through partnership with other researchers kind of at Penn State Beaver, Dr. Sarah Nilsson, and some researchers in the US Geological Survey who are studying ginseng, they developed these genetic markers that we can use to look at how the different populations of the plant are related to each other. And so my work is kind of combining those markers with physical traits, so comparing how the populations are related to each other and how we can see that in their physical appearance.
That is super interesting. So in some of your responses I had read beforehand, you talked about plant morphology and how the phenotype and certain structures of the ginseng plant helps you kind of identify and keep track of the plant. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when you look at like a taxonomic key, like a textbook definition of what American ginseng is versus what its sister taxa are, like Asian ginseng, you see that they have certain features that you can use to distinguish them from each other morphologically. But when you go out into the woods and you're sampling wild plants, or when you're doing cultivated sampling, looking at plants that people have been growing in either artificial shade gardens or in forest farms, you notice that there's a lot more variation than what those textbook kind of definitions say that there is. And so our first goal is to quantify that variation in a more systematic way, and then compare cultivated and wild lineages to see if there are any physical differences between the plants that we can detect morphologically. And the advantage of that is that if there's a way that we can identify native Appalachian lineages without having to dig them up, then we can prioritize those plants for seed banking conservation initiatives. And so with ginseng, I should mention that it's a federally protected plant under CITES. It's because of its use in medicine, it's been both kind of a big focus of conservation, and also it's been over-harvested predominantly for international trade, especially to Asia.
Very interesting. So I'm just curious about the history of ginseng. It isn't, from what I understand, it's not an invasive species necessarily, but the ginseng plants are located all throughout the world. Is that a correct way of thinking about the plant, just for people who are not as familiar?
That's a good question. So there are different species of ginseng within the genus Panax. And so Asian ginseng, or Panax ginseng, is the one that's found in throughout Asia, and it's the most commonly used one in the products that you see that contain ginseng. It's grown commercially. It's largely been extirpated in the wild within Asia, so you don't really find too many populations of wild ginseng there at all. American ginseng is native to the eastern United States. It can also grow in as far as places in the Midwest, and even as far as Iowa. There are people who are able to cultivate it there. It used to, I think, have a wider spread range than it does today, in part because starting in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a lot of international trade with Asia, where a lot of people who had settled in the US from Europe were harvesting a lot of ginseng and exporting it. And during that time, a lot of the populations declined, and ginseng has a pretty long life history. It takes anywhere from 5 to 12 years, but usually, more than 6 to reach maturity in the wild. And so when it's harvested, it takes a long time for those populations to recover because of that. And so the populations are much smaller than they used to be historically. So it's a native plant. It's a very prized native plant. There are a lot of cultural traditions around it, especially in the Appalachian region, with people who would forage for it to use in medicine, and now people who are growing it. And I've found, through talking to forest farmers, that people really identify a lot with this plant. Even, in the Asian kind of the way that they talk about it in the Chinese language, I think the name roughly translates to like human root or like man root. So there's this interconnected history between people and ginseng that, coming from an anthropology background, I think is interesting. But also from an environmental standpoint, I think caring for ginseng and, studying the cultivation of it and how people are stewarding the species also has a lot of applications to forest conservation and agroforestry more broadly. So I think I'm interested in it because it intersects between anthropology and environmental activism.
That is a really good answer. Yeah, I think I was going to go on to that and talk a little bit about how anthropology is such a great realm of academia because it really covers so many awesome topics that you can really combine and use to create these new innovative ideas. I think my next question was kind of going to go based off of like when you're studying, you talk a lot about cultivation, but you also mentioned medicinal uses. Could you maybe explain the medicinal uses and the differences between different cultures for these uses?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not an expert in this, but Chinese traditional medicine practitioners have used ginseng for a long time to treat a really wide range of conditions, from like fatigue and diabetes to even things like cancer and seizures. One of the big growers in Wisconsin that has been like a really great mentor to me and has worked with me and Eric a lot on our research. He is also a physician and he uses ginseng in his practice. So yeah, it's really a powerful tradition that a lot of people are interested in, especially coming from Asia, but also there's a growing herbalist tradition within the United States as well. And so I'm a little bit less familiar with that, but I've talked to several ginseng growers recently who are themselves herbalists and use ginseng and kind of offer it to others as a way to help the body adapt to stress mostly, but some other things as well.
Yeah, definitely. So something I'm interested about, and I'm sure maybe other undergraduates or other people in academia are wondering, like, could you maybe go through like the day-to-day life? You said you were in Wisconsin for a while, is that correct? Could you maybe tell us about maybe the methodology or day-to-day activities you do while you were conducting this research?
Yeah, so it's been a really fun experience working with Eric Burkhart and a group of his students. Ezra Houston is a master's student that has been working with us to do a lot of this field work. So for the field work side of things, we did sampling in Wisconsin and Ontario for those artificial shade cultivated ginseng populations. And what those are they have these artificial shade cloths. It's kind of hard to visualize without a picture, but imagine just a huge field of ginseng plants with a black shade cloth going across it. And what that does is it lets in the perfect amount of light because ginseng is a shade obligate species because it you know, in the wild it grows in the woods. And so they have these huge shade cloths to let in only the ideal amount of light. They treat the soil and things with fungicides and pesticides because ginseng is very susceptible to a lot of different diseases. And so the plants grow really well under those conditions. They get really big and beautiful red berries in the summer. And so what we would do for our research is we would collect leaflets, so just taking one leaf, and from each plant, we would kind of systematically survey an area to make sure that we were getting a representative sample from each of these different fields. And we would kind of preserve those specimens in silica desiccant to then ship to the lab that Sarah Nilsson runs at Penn State Beaver. And then she would then do the lab work to amplify the microsatellite markers that we're using to test for population structure and a couple other things. And then we would also do the same process, but in wild populations throughout Pennsylvania and some forest farmed populations as well. And so for those, we would, these are, you know, protected sites that, you know, are not available to the public because there's a concern about that information, like people using that information to then go dig the plants, which are protected. And so we would do the same thing where we would go and we would take some leaflet samples just for the genetics, but we would also, and we did this in Wisconsin and Ontario as well, but for a subset of those, we would take a field scanner and we would take measurements of a bunch of different above ground traits, and we would kind of take the whole top and scan it. And when you take the top from a ginseng plant, it doesn't kill the plant. It's just, it saves more energy to go to the root. It's when you dig the root out that it kills the plant. So we never dig any roots. Like for our research, it's just using the tops and the leaves. So we would take a scan of those, and I'm now in the process of analyzing those images to see how they compare with the genetic information that we have.
Alrighty, wow, that is a really extensive answer. But no, I said that the wrong way.
Yeah.
But no, in a really, you're very knowledgeable on the topic.
Thanks.
Which is really interesting. So you've done all this research. Would you say has there been any maybe disadvantages or things you wish you could go back and do looking back on? How long have you been doing this project? For almost 4 years now?
Yeah,
correct?
I've probably been working solidly on it for about 3 years now. Really, there are things that I would like to do in the future that we just didn't have the funding or the time to do within the time of my PhD. But looking to the future, I would really like to expand sampling efforts to more of the southern states to get more representation from those populations. I've been doing key informant interviews with a bunch of ginseng growers for my dissertation to kind of see whether there are traits that the growers themselves are picking up on, perhaps whether there are differences between seed that they get from artificial shade populations versus ones that come from local sources. And that has been a super informative process, and I'm really grateful to all the growers that have shared their insights with me. And a number of people that I've talked to are located in the southern states, and they're doing really amazing seed banking initiatives already from local seed. And so I would really love to get more involved in work that's happening down there.
Alrighty, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was going to ask next is like, what is next for you? Do you plan on moving down south and trying to study this? Are there limitations to building your career on this? Are there some advantages? You definitely have passion, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I have to finish my dissertation here. I still have about another year at least to finish up with that. And then after that, it really kind of depends on what opportunities are out there. I would love to, like I said, expand sampling effort into the South. The great thing about ginseng is that there are so many people who are very invested in this plant and in medicinal plants more broadly. So I'd be interested in still working, with native plants in some way. Whether or not it's in a research capacity, but I found that the people that I've met through doing this are just like really wonderful people, and I've learned a lot from them. So I think I'd like to continue kind of somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think you talked about a little bit how you came to Penn State and you did spend some time focusing on like non-human primates and like that type of realm. Does that at all tie in or parallel to your studies with the ginseng plants or plants in general?
That's a good question. I do think that there are a lot of parallels. And what originally got me interested in anthropology was the non-human primate research, and I was able to do some of that in my master's. In my PhD, my anthropology advisor, P.J. Perry, he has helped me get involved with some comparative genomics research with some non-human primates. So on the side, I'm kind of working on that a little bit. And that's been a really great process, learning from him about these things. And I would love to continue being involved in that in whatever way that I can. But I see a lot of connections between the two because a lot of the conservation challenges that primates face, with long life histories and forests being converted for intensive agriculture, that's something that also affects native plants in the US. And so it's a very broad connection that they share, but I think, as I'm doing this research on ginseng, I'm reminded of a lot of the literature on primates as well. Yeah.
So I'm also interested, so we're here at Penn State, and you talked about how the Appalachian region kind of drew you in. Is there any more draws to Penn State that you felt really helped kind of catalyze and build your career this far?
Yeah, so there were a lot of great people here that I would have been excited to work with, and so I've had a really great experience on my dissertation committee. I work with, like I said, my advisor, PJ, Eric Burkhart, he's in the Ecosystem Science and Management department, and he directs the Appalachian Botany and Ethnobotany program. And I also work with Mary Shank and Tim Ryan, other anthropology professors. Tim Ryan does evolutionary morphology work, and that, coming from my background with my master's, I really wanted to stay involved in that. And Mary does a lot of different things, but one of the things that she's been helping me with is to develop the key informant interviews with the ginseng growers to kind of get at that human dimension of resource use. And it's been really great working with them. They've really helped me develop my skills a lot as a scientist. Another thing that I was impressed with that Penn State has was they have Shavers Creek Environmental Center, which is an outreach organization that is a nature center where people can learn about native wildlife. And so since I started here, my first year, I've been volunteering with the Wildlife Education and Engagement program, where I work on training birds and reptiles, and there's a great team of people there that are helping me learn the skills to be a public educator about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also just wanted to ask, so for our viewers and those other people who view, you have a lot of international experience. Do you feel like that has prepared you for Penn State specifically, or maybe your career to this point? Could you maybe give us some sort of insight into those journeys abroad?
Yeah, so I would say that it definitely helps in terms of learning how to navigate the bureaucracy of things. Getting, research permits to work abroad is, there are just a lot of steps involved in that, and I've been really fortunate that I've had really great mentors to help me through that process. And I think something that for me has always been kind of more of a driver of this is like social relationships with people. And I found that when, everything that I've done, it's been informed by a relationship of some sort that's really meaningful to me. And the times where research projects of mine haven't worked out, it's usually been because there wasn't a relationship kind of at the foundation of that. So my advice, I guess, to anyone who is looking to get into research is to just prioritize those relationships for the people that you care about in your life, people who are part of your community, because that will make everything easier and also more fun along the way.
Well, that's a really beautiful message. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you'd like to add towards your research, or maybe share anything else about your own experiences?
I don't think so. This is my first time doing something like this. So yeah, I really appreciate you chatting with me about this.
No, it was so interesting. Thank you for taking the time. Alrighty, thank you.
Hadi.